Well, legacy media took a bizarre little victory lap this week as Michael Sussmann was acquitted. High-powered Democratic lawyer Michael Sussmann was acquitted of lying to federal officials as part of he had been charged as part of the Durham probe. He was acquitted this week by a jury here in Washington, D.C. The jury itself is part of an interesting part of this story, actually. And we are now joined by the host of Pushback, airing on the Gray Zone, and he's the author of the Maté Substack, the one and only Maté, to discuss this. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I think when the legacy media was saying, wow, this was such a hit to the Durham probe, it was silly all along, they're completely wrong, and they're missing a lot of different context here. So clue us in kind of on what people should know about what happened this week, which I think is actually sort of pretty chilling in terms of the power of the ruling class here in D.C.
Well, look, it was a hit to the Durham probe. This was the first Durham case to go to trial. But to then claim that this is then a hit to the narrative that there was something very wrong with the Trump-Russia investigation is a complete mistake. The problem with Durham is that Durham brought the wrong charge. He brought a charge that actually doesn't stand up. Now, he accused Michael Sussmann, a Clinton attorney, of lying to the FBI when in the fall of 2016, Sussmann went to the FBI and tried to present to them evidence that he said possibly showed a Trump-Russia secret back channel between the Trump organization and a Russian bank called Alpha Bank. And he presented some data. And in the process, he said that I'm not doing this on behalf of any client. I'm just coming here as a concerned citizen. Durham's allegation was that was a lie, that really in reality Sussmann was working for the Clinton campaign and billing his time to the Clinton campaign. And it's true. The problem with Durham's case, though, is that he doesn't get, or at least he didn't articulate, that the FBI was in on the lie the entire time. Mm-hmm. And that's the entire scandal here. The scandal is not that Michael Sussmann lied to the FBI. The scandal is that the FBI was in on Michael Sussmann's lie. And so when he said to them, I'm not working on behalf of any client, that was an obvious cover story for everyone involved so that they could proceed. Because there's no way that the FBI did not know that Michael Sussmann was working for the Clinton campaign. There's no way at all. Of course they knew that. They worked very closely with him. At that point, the FBI was relying on Michael Sussmann and the Clinton campaign for all sorts of information. The Steele dossier, CrowdStrike, which was the private firm investigating the DNC, the alleged DNC hack. So this cover story that we're supposed to believe that the FBI didn't know who Michael Sussmann was working for, that just does not pass the smell test.
Yeah, it's an absolute joke, and you're right. Durham's charge, I think, helped to perpetuate that joke. Yeah.
Right, because if you step back and think about at the time that Sussmann is reaching out, like you said, they know who he works for at the time. And so even if you call it a lie, which they couldn't prove that it was a lie because he's saying, look, basically what that line is saying is that you know that I work for the Hillary Clinton campaign, but I'm coming to you because I am concerned personally about this thing. And that's virtually an impossible thing to prove is untrue unless you get an email from the Hillary Clinton campaign to him saying, I would like you to go to the FBI on our behalf and claim that you are going on your personal, at your own personal insistence. Like, if you don't have that, it's impossible to prove what's in his mind. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't tell it to prove to a jury, in other words, that look, he didn't believe that this was true. He didn't want to go in his personal capacity, but Hillary Clinton ordered him to do so. So I think you're right that like it's a very weird charge to make. And I want to get your response to something that Attorney General Barr said, I think on Fox News. He said it's fine that this, basically it's unfortunate that they didn't get the conviction, but it's fine. It's still good that they went forward with this prosecution because it exposed the machinations of the Clinton campaign, and it really embedded in the consciousness of the media and the public that the Clinton campaign was responsible for this Trump-Russia stuff. Whether that's true or not, that to me seems like an egregious abuse of the Justice Department, of the prosecution, because he was a high-powered attorney. You know, now the guy, he's been unemployed the entire time. I'm sure this was an insanely costly thing. So what do you think about the idea of kind of weaponizing prosecution for what Barr says was a public relations goal? Maybe whether you agree with the PR goal or not, it does feel like an untoward use of of prosecutorial power, no?
Well, the problem here is I do agree with the PR goal as you put it,
Right.
because I do think
I know you do, but isn't
because,
it,
but look,
isn't it the
but
wrong way
because
to
there
go
was,
about it?
right, I think this comes down to whether or not you think it was wrong for the Justice Department and the FBI to be weaponized on behalf of the Clinton campaign
Yeah.
to push this Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, which had major consequences on the country, certainly, and the world. And if you start from the premise that that was wrong, and then there was a lot of shady business, then for a federal official to put factual information into an indictment, which is, it happens very often, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's actually one of the few chances of accountability that we have for what was a major scandal, a lot of wrongdoing, lying to the FISA courts, lying to the public, keeping this fiction going for more than 2 years that the president might be a Russian asset, hugely consequential. And I think there should be consequences for it. And if that includes using the avenues you have to put facts into the public domain, I think that's a good thing. And look, recall what the Mueller team did. The Mueller team knew all along that they had nothing. That's very, very clear now. You can go back and there's even some acknowledgments of that from people who worked on the Mueller probe. But what they did instead was they were basically content creators, and they used their indictments to push this false narrative that they had something, that they were honing in on a Trump-Russia conspiracy. The walls were closing in. And you had to read the indictments very, very carefully to realize there was actually nothing there because they were written in such a disingenuous way. So if the investigation into the investigation has to put out some facts, because I do think there are facts and very damning facts about the Clinton campaign's behavior and the FBI's behavior, then I think that's fine.
Well, if it's wrong, if it's wrong to use the FBI, if it's wrong for Hillary to exploit the FBI in 2020, why is it right for
because the Hillary campaign and the FBI were pushing a fake conspiracy theory that they invented. It was all, and Mueller team was giving credence to it. Durham has put facts into the public record. There's nothing that he's put out that I think you can say has been misleading or disingenuous. It's facts, and the facts show a conspiracy, basically, to concoct a very damaging narrative that has had major consequences.
And I think that's why, actually, this charge, it wasn't ideal, but I actually think the prosecution did a good job with it. I think there's legitimacy to the charge, whether or not it was successful or the ideal reason to charge. I think it actually was legitimate. If you look at the prosecution's argument, there's serious reasons to believe that Sussmann was lying, obviously. And so on that note, Alpha Bank is as good an example as any, to your point, Aaron, that they invented the conspiracy theory knowing that they had nothing. Both the Clinton campaign and the FBI had reason to believe this Alpha Bank conspiracy theory was bananas, and they're very, very thin from the moment they started peddling it. What can you tell us about the jury and the judge who heard this trial, and I believe actually also had connections? Wasn't the judge's spouse representing Lisa Page? There's something weird in there, right?
I haven't looked into that. I do know that there are people who have accused the judge of having partisan bias and the jury of having partisan leanings. That makes sense to me just without knowing the facts, because we're in D.C.
Right.
So the odds are that you're going to have a partisan jury pool. But again, I will say in their defense, accusing Michael Sussmann of lying to the FBI for a lie that the FBI was in on, it's a weak case. It is. Now, perhaps it's the only case that Durham could have brought to get it into court and in the process bring out the facts. But look, I will say it is technically true that he did lie. I mean, you showed that text message earlier when Sussmann texted Jim Baker, his FBI contact, "I'm not coming on behalf of any client." We just know that that's false. He's billing his client, the Clinton campaign, for his time, and they're plotting behind the scenes about how to get this phony Alpha Bank Trump allegation into the FBI and to the media. The problem, though, is that the jury couldn't even weigh that text message. They had to weigh the charge solely on the recollection of Michael Sussmann and Jim Baker in their meeting. And that's where, to Ryan's point, it gets impossible to prove, because how are you going to convict someone based on what one person recalls versus another?
We're being told we got to go. One more point on Mueller versus Durham. It feels like there are some parallels that we should acknowledge, and one being, so Durham, in that he put out a bunch of information in that indictment that then immediately goes on Fox News and makes it around the kind of conservative echo chamber, and what he essentially put in there was, and it was spun to say, and tell me if you think my interpretation is accurate, that the Clinton campaign or somebody was hacking, that there was hacking involved and there was like espionage involved, and and that there was this Sussmann Clinton campaign conspiracy to basically hack the Obama. There was unauthorized hacking of the Obama administration, and it turned out that what actually happened is that there was a cyber firm that had legitimate access to this data, and the data was analyzed. That analysis was turned over to the FBI. Durham then, a couple days later, after you've had 48-hour freak out on the right, says, look, it's not my fault if the media misinterprets what I put in my indictment, but this is not what I was alleging. And so you seem to have some interesting parallels there, where you have each side is convinced that their own case is an absolute slam dunk, but then when the facts are actually laid out in the public, it's much murkier and much grayer. The media then of each side then spins it up into see, we told you, here's this Trump Tower meeting happened, or see, there's this surveillance and there's this hacking, when actually it seems that it's much grayer. There's no pun intended.
Well, look, I mean, I'll agree with you that the contents of the Durham indictment, when it comes to Sussmann, the parts of it were misinterpreted and taken to mean more than they actually showed. But to me, there's no equivalence whatsoever. We're talking about a presidential campaign with the full knowledge, by the way, of the intelligence community, because this isn't discussed much. But in July 2016, before even Crossfire Hurricane, the Trump-Russia investigation, officially opened, John Brennan went to Barack Obama and said, "We picked up intelligence that the Russian government knows about a plot by the Hillary Clinton campaign to manufacture a Trump-Russia conspiracy in a bid to distract from her own use of a private email server." So there were warnings early on that the Clinton campaign was up to something dirty. And instead of looking into that, the FBI used the Clinton camp's material as source material for investigative leads and for even spying on Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page. And as we know, this escalated not into a couple of months, not into an October surprise, but into a multi-year scandal that was hugely consequential. So you compare that to right-wing media when the Durham investigation that's looking into this scam comes out and some details are used to exaggerate what actually happened. I don't think there's any equivalency. And look, the Sussmann case has brought out some damning revelations. The Clinton campaign did essentially concoct this claim of a Trump Russian bank back channel. They fudged the data. That came out in the Durham investigation. It was acknowledged that they were doing this based on partisan leanings and with a goal to taint Trump and manufacture a Trump-Russia link that wasn't there. So that's damning. And there was even some use of some Trump campaign data, like some phones. And that's damning. What business do they have doing that? What business does the FBI have relying on information supplied by Trump's political opponent? So I don't think you can draw an equivalence there.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say that it is true. The wife of the judge in the Sussmann case represented Lisa Page, and that's what happens when you try these things here in D.C. And Danchenko coming up is going to be tried in Virginia. I'm not sure if that'll be much better, but Aaron Maté, thank you so much for breaking down this case for us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.